I think about what it was like for me as a kid and all of the things that I didn't know or that no one ever said to me. The foundation of the conversation should have been, how are you really? And like, what is going on with you? What has happened with you, the human, the child, the person? And it wasn't. At the time, it was, what's wrong with you? The question has to shift from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And that's what I didn't get as a kid. No one was asking, why was I eating in the first place? What was I feeling? What was I thinking? What was happening for me? It just became, you're doing something wrong and you need to change what you're doing.
Welcome to Normalize The Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicheter, and today I'm joined by Lisa Schlosberg, licensed social worker, trauma-informed coach, and founder of Out of the Cave, helping individuals break free from the cycle of dieting and emotional eating. In this episode, Lisa shares how her personal journey going from childhood obesity to extreme restriction exposed to dangerous flaws in the diet industry. She reveals why true healing isn't about weight loss, but about unlearning toxic beliefs and finding balance with food and body image. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today. I am very excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I just want to check in. How are you really?
I love this question. I am really doing well, and also I think recovering from just like a minor illness. So there's part of me that is grateful to be feeling better, but I would be lying if I was like, I'm at 100% right now, because I definitely am not.
I love the honesty. First of all, I'm glad you're feeling a bit better, and I hope you get to 100% soon.
Thank you.
It's so important that we talk about it because the other day, actually, in one of my classes, I'm doing my master's in clinical psych, and my teacher made me be like the guinea pig, I guess, to show what a clinical interview looks like for the other students. And at the end, he was like, you don't look like someone who goes through anything. You just look so put together. And like, boy, on the outside, I had no idea you've ever gone through anything, that you're ever struggling. And I was like, that's why I talk about it all the time, because if we're not talking about it, we make these assumptions that everyone's feeling 100%. And we might treat people a little differently if we knew, hey, no one's actually at 100% usually.
I appreciate that. And even like when I first saw the title of this podcast, I was just like, this is a big full body yes for me. All of this just feels very important. So 100% on the same page there.
It is so important. It's so important we talk about it because there's so many things that aren't talked about. And we struggle so much until years later, someone finally says it. And then you're like, if only someone talked to me about this when I was like 12, you know how different my life could have been?
Absolutely. Yep.
So on that note, I read a bit of your story and was just so amazed at how honest you were, because I know for me, with my relationship with food growing up and battling with different eating disorders, I think so much I didn't know until years later when someone finally put it in perspective. And it sounds like that was similar with what you went through. And I was like, this is a conversation we need to have. So on that note, can you tell us about you and your journey?
Yes. So I will summarize. I'll give you a long story short. I was very overweight as a child. So I always say, like, as soon as I could feed myself, I was eating too much. All of my memories of being a kid were in a body that was quote unquote too big. And I was, according to my doctors and BMI chart, morbidly obese for my childhood, my teenage years. And then again, the long story short is I went to college. I decided for the first time in my life that I was going to really do something about my weight. And I lost 150 pounds. And at the end of my weight loss, found myself really deep in an eating disorder that I did not understand. Like, I was coming from a place of, I just followed all the instructions. Like, all my doctors always told me to eat less and exercise more. And so I did. And I just ended up kind of taking it to an extreme. I did not know that you could possibly eat too little or exercise too much. No one ever warned me about that part. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I was really in a place of starvation and malnourishment. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was really, really struggling and very confused. And then I had to kind of reverse the intention. So it wasn't a focus on weight, it was a focus on health, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and really just start understanding myself as a human being, not a body. So the last, it's been 12 years since then. So the last, over a decade has been really understanding myself as a complex, multidimensional human, learning how to take care of myself and get my needs met from places that are not food and eating and dieting and weight loss, and ultimately supporting other people in doing that. So I started as a personal trainer, then I became a health coach, then I got my master's in social work. I'm not getting my doctorate in social work and become a yoga instructor. So I've just been kind of evolving this holistic approach to supporting people with food and eating and body image over the last 10 years or so. And that's, again, like the very long story short. But I just also want to say, like, back to kind of like your original question and the way that you framed it. I think about what it was like for me as a kid and all of the things that I didn't know or that no one ever said to me. And that's why I'm so passionate about doing what I do now, because the foundation of the conversation should have been, how are you really? And like, what is going on with you? What has happened with you, the human, the child, the person? And it wasn't. At the time, it was, what's wrong with you? Right. And we talk about this in trauma informed care all the time, where the question has to shift from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And that's what I didn't get as a kid. No one was asking, why was I eating in the first place? What was I feeling? What was I thinking? What was happening for me? It just became, you're doing something wrong and you need to change what you're doing. And so it completely shifted my entire worldview years later when I started learning, more about the mind body connection and how our relationship with food has everything to do with our emotions. So I just really like personally resonate with that, the entire framework of like, we need to bring this conversation to light way earlier for a lot of people.
Me too. Because first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing it. You're so amazing. But it is so true. And the way that they frame it and the way society frames it is about our self-worth and our bodies and size. And no one talks about how to care for your body in a healthy way, at least not at a young age. And
Right.
I was a competitive cheerleader, and I remember my coaches telling us we need to go on diet. So that when we were like 15, 17, it's no longer acting wire, so it was easier on the diets. And I was already very tiny and not eating well. So I took it to the extreme of eating like an almond and a piece of grilled chicken a day until I must follow all my things, thinking this is how it's supposed to be. Because the conversation is always stop eating, be smaller, and it's not fuel your body in a way that makes you feel good.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that you went through that and that you were taught that. And it's like, it's always, I hear stories like this all the time, and it's just, it continues to always be so heartbreaking because it's like 15, like, you're young and you're learning a lot about how to even be a human in a body at that time. Not to mention the fact that your body is changing and developing, and like the number one priority should be health and growth. It's just, but this is the stuff. This is why we need to talk about it, because it's everywhere. It's so common, unfortunately.
It is. And when people are talking about weight loss, even if they mean it in a healthy way, without that conversation on nutrition, without talking about how you can eat too little, you can exercise too much. That's for some reason, at least for me, and it sounds like for you, never framed that way. So it's not until you're feeling very sick, till you have no energy, and then everyone's like, well, what's wrong with you? Why would you do that?
Right.
Why did you tell me?
Right. Very relatable. Exactly.
It's so frustrating. So I guess for you, what was it like when someone finally said, or did someone finally say it, or did you realize it? Like, I'm not eating enough.
Yeah. So what happened for me was I I started my weight loss with Jenny Craig, like TBT. And when I did that, they gave me a quote unquote goal weight. Like this is the weight that according to the BMI chart and blah blah blah, that you should aim for, which was about 160, 170 pounds away from where I was starting. And then when I got to very close, I was like 10 pounds. This is what I remember. I was like 10 pounds away from my goal weight. And at this point, I think this is I've learned this is an important part of the story, that I started not feeling well. So, kind of like what you were saying, I was getting like dizzy and nauseous and fatigued, and like my hair. Oh my God, I lost so much hair. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't poop. Like my body just like wasn't functioning. And I had no idea why, like legitimately no clue. And I went to a handful of different doctors. First, I went to my pediatrician, then I went to my parents' doctor, then I went to an OBGYN, and finally an endocrinologist. And I went to all of these doctors seeking answers. I was like, I am not feeling well, and I don't know why. And so we ran all the tests, and every single one of those doctors said the same thing. This is the healthiest you've ever been. Congratulations on your weight loss. Just maintain your weight for a while and you'll be fine. Like you'll come back to normal. And so I was kind of left, and this was part of why eventually years later I would, start my own business and start working with people, because I felt so betrayed by the medical model. It was so not helpful. And then eventually I called my mom's friend who was a nutritionist. And it wasn't until I spoke with a nutritionist where I said to her, I can't seem to lose the last 10 pounds. And I don't know why, because I'm barely eating anything. I'm exercising every single day. I can barely function, but I have 10 pounds left to lose. So I don't know how you could possibly tell me to eat any less, but I want to lose the last 10 pounds. So do you have any advice for me? And she asked me what I was eating every day. And I very proudly told her, I'm like basically not even eating breakfast. I'm having like a little salad for lunch and then like no snacks and then another salad for dinner and nothing after that. And I'm doing everything I should be doing. Why isn't it working? And she responded to me by saying, are you still getting your period? And I was like, that is so crazy that you asked me that, because 2 weeks ago, for the first time in my entire life, I skipped my period. I didn't get it. And how in the world could you possibly know that? And then she said, you have to stop for now. This whole weight loss thing. You are actually in what we call survival mode. Your body is fighting you to keep the weight on. You cannot eat any less. This is not sustainable. We have to really release the goal of weight loss now and focus on recovery and healing and restoring your body. And at that point, I remember just being so shocked and confused. Like I had spent my entire life overeating. And now, basically a year later, someone was telling me that I was starving. And I was like, that's not me starving. Like I wouldn't know a first thing about how to do that. I hadn't caught up to, how disordered and unhealthy it was. And I just had no idea. So that was really kind of the aha moment. Was I reached out to her trying to lose more weight, and she was the one that was like, we need to kind of change course here. And that was the beginning of what ultimately I would consider like an emotional breakthrough, spiritual awakening. Like that changed everything. Because then I had to really pay attention to how I was doing and how I was feeling. And until that point, I was essentially completely dissociated through the entire process. So that's how that went for me.
I am so happy you access that nutritionist who, especially your friend's mom, who was able to put it together because our medical system often doesn't. They're so focused on the weight. So many people go into the doctor with medical concerns, and their first mode of action is lose the weight and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I have tremendous feelings about that still to this day. And it really is a good point. I always say I was very fortunate to have the resources that I did. And I was lucky enough to be able to contact not just a nutritionist, but also work with a therapist at that point to really support me in getting myself into a healthy place, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally. And like, I think it's important to acknowledge, not everyone has that. And there is a level of privilege that I benefited from having, that I could be supported where I was, because I would never have figured that out alone. And I also, obviously going to 4 different doctors did not catch it, was not helpful. So yeah, yeah.
it is so heartbreaking and frustrating. I also was very privileged to have a nutritionist at that point. For me, I was in undergrad and went to the infirmary because I was like passing out. My hairbrush, so losing hair, like I would brush my hair and it would be like a chunk of hair on my hairbrush. I was, oh no, it's my only good teacher. What am I gonna do? So yeah. And because I was about 95 pounds at that time, I looked the mold of anorexic, which I was. So she required that I got my blood work checked every 3 weeks, and then I had to see a nutritionist twice a week, plus a trainer, to try to give me some strength in my body. And I remember sitting with the nutritionist, and she had this like chart with the list of different foods. It's like, okay, you have to pick something from the protein list. You have to pick, I remember her making me pick beans. I had like beans back then. Like rice or quinoa, they were going through each thing, and you have to pick one of these with this meal, you have to. And even in the dining hall, because I had a meal plan, they would kind of check in and make sure I was eating and I was putting enough stuff on my plate, and it wasn't just vegetables. And that, I fought it for so long, I really did. And that finally started to change when I got a little bit of energy back. But one thing that was a huge missing piece was I would refuse to go to therapy. Would not do it. And so much of our relationship with food comes from our mental and emotional health.
Relatable throughout. I mean, all of it. And I remember at a certain point for me, it was a couple of months after that initial conversation with that nutritionist, that months later, because when she said, now you have to focus on eating more and exercising less, I was like, all right, say less. I got this. Like, I was very like a lone soldier. I will take care of this myself. And then it was a couple months later that I reached back out to her and was like, I am struggling. Like, I was so afraid of food. I was so afraid of weight gain. And that was when we got back on the phone. And I remember her saying to me, this is how I treat my anorexic patients. Like, this is what we're going to do. And I had very similarly like a meal plan with a certain number of calories. And I had to kind of like hit the goal of eating enough. And so that's why it was this kind of like tag team of like, one day I was on the phone with a nutritionist, and then I was also talking to a therapist because I was just so scared. And like, there was so much, and that's what I didn't expect through all of this journey. Like, I thought that I was just going to lose weight and like live happily ever after, because that's what people tell you is going to happen. And I didn't know. But at that point, when I couldn't overeat or undereat as a way of coping with stress and trauma and life and emotion, there was like a huge emotional upheaval that started to happen that a lot of people experienced if they're in recovery for any kind of drug or other addiction. And so I was feeling completely out of control, not just around food, but really like internally and emotionally. So it was so important, even though I was extremely resistant and judgmental about it, that I addressed that part of it, and that I had the support to do that.
How long did it take for you to get over the initial resistance and enough to actually like listen and work on it?
Yeah. Well, I started therapy when I was forced to go to therapy by my parents my freshman year of high school. So I was like 14, and I was close to 300 pounds. And I didn't know this at the time, but it came out like years later that the reason that they sent me to therapy was because they were concerned about my weight. And we had tried all different diets and meal plans and this and that, and nothing ever worked. So they sent me to therapy, and I was like the stereotypical resistant teenager where I would sit there with my arms folded being like, I have nothing to talk about, this is a waste of time, therapy is stupid. And I stayed there for like years. Eventually, I warmed up to it a little bit. We talked about some stuff. I was angry. I was an angry kid and I had plenty to talk about eventually. But then I went to college, and I went to Michigan undergrad. And so I grew up in New York. So I was no longer around. And so I was, I'm going to college, like, peace out, therapist. I'll be in touch if I need you. Thinking we're never going to talk again. And then it was after I lost all my weight. And while I was doing that, I was like on top of the world. Like, I just thought, again, I am about to cross the finish line. I will live happily ever after. I'm thin now, and that'll make me happy. And I was so bought into that. And then it wasn't until all of my weight came off, I had this conversation with the nutritionist. And then a few weeks after that, here's what happened. I remember it was July 4th of 2013. And I just got sick. I was like I had a sore throat and a fever and like typical kind of stuff. This story has nothing to do with July 4th. I just remember that's when it was. And it was like that week that I found myself waking up in the morning, getting on the scale was the first thing I did. And then I took my temperature and I had like 101 fever. And then I took a couple Advil and I went to the gym. And I remember on the third day in a row of doing that, because I had an internship in Detroit. So I went to the gym before work and then I would go to work and whatever. So I remember doing that. And on the third day, I felt so sick. Like, I felt so miserable. And I remember like sitting on the mats, stretching after like 45 minutes on the Stairmaster or whatever it was at the time. And I just like burst into tears. And I was like, this is an eating disorder. Like, this is a very typical, like, I know that I shouldn't be doing this and I'm doing it anyway. This is not healthy. If I saw anyone else doing this, I would know that something was wrong. Like, and it was that moment of like, oh shit, like, I'm not okay. Something's wrong here. And that was, I'm saying all this and now I don't even remember exactly what your question was, but I know that that was the moment that I like had this epiphany of like something needs to change, something's going on here. And that's why I remember your question. That is when I reached out to my therapist. And I remember reaching out to her and just kind of being like, I'm not well. I know it's been a long time since we spoke, but I now find myself in this place where I'm literally taking Advil to kill a fever to go work out at the gym. Like, I need help. And until that point, I didn't think that I needed any help. I just was following the meal plan and it was working. So it wasn't on my radar to get any support with it. And that is when I kind of was like, I'm no longer resistant to this. I'm no longer judging this, because clearly if I leave it to myself, I'm sick and I'm struggling and I can't do this alone anymore.
It's amazing that you were able to recognize that on your own. I mean, not amazing that you were having to take an Advil, go to the gym to the point where you were really physically sick, but that you were able to catch yourself. You were able to recognize it and reach out for the support that you needed and deserved.
Yeah.
I refused to admit I was in a psych unit. Like, refused. And I remember my mom making me see a therapist in high school because I wasn't eating. And the only way I would talk to a therapist is if we're going for a walk. I was like, if we're moving our body, like, I will talk to you. Otherwise, I'm not just sitting here. And so she'd go for walks with me and try to talk to me. And I had it so like deep in my mind that if I didn't eat and I lost enough weight, my dad would come home because I was convinced like my parents' marriage was erupting because it makes me laugh now because I know it's not true. But back then I was like convinced it had to do with me. And it wasn't genuinely until I was in a psych unit that I honestly, no. After the psych unit, my dad forced me to go to therapy 4 times a week. My dad would go sit in the waiting room, or my grandmother, or my cousin, like someone was always in the waiting room, making sure I was there before I finally even recognized what I was doing, what was happening behind it, because it was all emotional.
Yeah.
It was emotional, it was cognitive distortions. And until I was forced to really be there and talk about it, nothing was changing. And it was so, I wish I understood years before. I don't know if I even would have been receptive to it years.
Right.
Is that big?
Right. Totally. I remember at that point for me, because sometimes people say that to me, like, wow, you admitted it, you acknowledged it. Like, that for a lot of people is the biggest obstacle to healing, is that there's so much, kind of like what you're saying, there's so much resistance to even acknowledging that that's happening. And I think that for me, the way that I remember talking about it was that I remember using the word infiltrated. I felt like my mind had been infiltrated by this like demonic voice that was telling me to take an Advil and go to the gym. Like there was just so much like I don't even know, like space between what felt like the quote unquote like real me or like the true me and this voice that I was like obeying. And I just remember being like, this isn't me, this isn't mine. Like I can't shut it off, I can't get rid of it. I'm listening to it and I'm doing what it's telling me to do, but there was always this like, this isn't, I didn't feel identified with it. It felt like it seeped into my brain at some point in the weight loss process, and it just like took over. And I remember being like, oh God, like I'm no longer the one in control anymore. But I so desperately wanted out. Like I didn't want to be driven by that anymore. And I think that's why when I think about these parts of my story, I just wanted to recover. I just wanted to heal. Like my intention was always to quote unquote kind of like do the right thing. It just got really misguided because of everything that I learned how to do or what to do. Eat less and exercise more. It got really out of hand, but the intention was always my health and well-being. And then so at a certain point when it was like, wait, this is clearly not healthy, this is not for well-being anymore, it was like, how did I even end up here? This wasn't my decision. Like, how, it was so confusing at the time.
I love the way you describe that, like the thoughts infiltrated, that demonic voice infiltrated the brain, because looking back, that's totally what it was.
Right.
It's something else. It started with, for me, the messages in movies about a cheerleader's body. And then my coach is telling me that I shouldn't be eating and that I should need to be smaller. And then thinking like my dad will come home if I don't eat enough. And then still to this day, I hear those thoughts. And now I know it's not me.
Right.
But I love the way you describe it, because now it's totally what I'm going to say. I'm stealing that.
Steal it. I'm glad it resonates.
It does. It's so, but that's the thing, is we think it's our own voices. And there's so much of that within our mental health and the thoughts we tell ourselves. A lot of it comes from other people or messages that we internalize and take it in a very different way than it was initially meant, until we're deeply struggling and hopefully get to a point where someone points it out to us or we recognize it for ourselves and are able to separate the thoughts and narratives that were placed on us from who we actually are. But having to rediscover who you are, or even just discover who you are for the first time, so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah. It is. And it really, I mean, for me, it was like an entire identity shift because, because sometimes people ask the follow-up question of like, well, how did you heal? Or like, what did you need to learn? Or anything like that. And it really ultimately comes down to I grew up really believing the persona that I created for myself. Like um I always say I was like the strong one. So, like I said, by the time I was 14, I was like, therapy is stupid, feelings are dumb. Like I was so like, this doesn't apply to me. Um, and I grew up with this mindset of like, I'm fine, everything's fine. I don't need anyone. I don't need help. And I know exactly where that comes from, and I'm happy to, share more details of that story. But the reason that it did require figuring out who I was all those years later was because if I wasn't stuffing down all my feelings with food, I had to actually feel them. And what that required was having a complete identity shift and understanding that, oh, being a human means being vulnerable, means being sensitive, means being emotional, means being empathic and intuitive and spiritual. And there's all these parts of me that I was just so in denial of and so defended against growing up that a lot of the healing that happened for me at that point was not just, again, learning how to feel things instead of eat them, but having like a completely different understanding of who I was and what I was as a human being and having to like integrate that and work on that. So it did. It was an entire shift in like paradigm.
We think that being strong means not having feelings because feelings are vulnerable. Being vulnerable is bad. And the messages we're taught as a kid, genuinely, I remember I was very emotional. I cried all the time. And I remember people saying, like, cry me a river, build a bridge, and get over it.
Oh,
Or well, stop acting like a baby. Big girls don't cry. Love that song so much. Hate that saying. And it's just, what if no one ever said that to me? What if I actually believed it was okay to have options? How would that have changed?
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. That's why for so much of, the work I do now, I work with people who are primarily people who identify as emotional eaters, like people who are struggling with food or using food to cope. And the thing that I say all the time, a couple things. Three things. One is you can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. So a lot of people who are struggling with food, as we have learned in our own personal journeys, you can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. You can eat all the right things, you can be at your quote unquote goal weight, but if you are not doing that work mentally and emotionally to really, get your needs met internally, feel safe with yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your body, your experience, none of that's really going to get the need met. So that's the first thing. The next thing that always comes up is if the biggest problem that you have with food is that you're an emotional eater, it's not a problem that you have with food. It's a question about how you're coping with your emotions. Because for a lot of people, we just get lost. We just get lost saying, I have a problem with food. What should I eat? And it's like, that's not the problem. That's not the root of the problem. The problem is where did your mind body system get disconnected in the first place that you don't have access to listening to your body? Like, this is about getting to the root of it. And then the other thing that is always just coming up in the work that I do is if you find yourself eating when you're not physically hungry, it doesn't mean the hunger isn't real. It just means the hunger isn't physical, which means it can't be satiated with food. So it's just this idea of like, there is something going on underneath and internally, again, emotionally, spiritually, socially. Where are you not getting your needs met? And then how are you trying to kind of like fill that void with food? Because, to the point of the title of this podcast is like, it is so normal. It is the most normal human valid thing ever in the world. It is so beyond appropriate that we seek out food for comfort. Our brain is literally biologically designed to do that. There's chemical reactions behind it. There's neurotransmitters at play. Like it is the most normal thing, but we don't talk about it because there's been so much shame and fear and embarrassment and meaning making that we're doing something wrong or that we're a failure. We should be ashamed. We should be embarrassed. And it's all just a lie. It's a very profitable lie from the diet culture industry and all of that. But it's like, it is the most normal thing a person could do is turn to food for coping. So it's really like, again, the approach now that I've learned all of this, you know, and I do all of this is it's totally cool. It's totally okay and valid if food is your number one coping mechanism. And, you know, if you want to do something about that, it's not about the food. It's about what's driving you to eat when you're not hungry in the first place, or not eat when you are hungry. You know, it works the same way.
That makes so much sense. And it's so true. It is emotional. I mean, for both of us it was, and for so many it is. And that's not something that's talked about. It is a coping skill. It is a defense mechanism. It is the way to feel like we have control in a world that feels so uncontrollable. The one thing, at least that I felt I could control, was how much I ate or didn't eat. Don't get into the root cause. It's the messaging, the way that we internalize it, the way that we approach it, the messaging that we're telling ourselves, the way we feel about ourselves, just continues to oftentimes decline, deteriorate, and make us not like ourselves, make us think that, at least for me, that this is just my body rejecting me. And
Right.
my brain telling me things that weren't true.
Right. And that's such an important point that comes up really often, like just this distinction between the body and the brain or the mind, where, and I appreciate the way that you are saying that, where it's like, it does become this perception of like, my body hates me, or my body is broken, or my body is bad. And it's like, wait, no, your body is your home. Your body is the vessel that you exist within. Your body is only ever trying to be on your team. Your body heals itself. Your body is on your side. It's the mind and the brain that has internalized all of these, you know, dysfunctional beliefs and thought patterns that have you create this kind of conflict between mind and body. But your body is innocent. And sometimes just digesting that idea, like my body is innocent, I've spent all this time being mad at it and blaming it and shaming it. And it's like, it's a mental thing. It doesn't live in the body. Really important point.
Then back to what you said before, that mind-body connection. It is so important when we're able to get back to that. We really can decide, or not even decide, we can begin to fuel our body and our mind in a way that makes us feel good. Because then, when you said before, starting to feel depressed when you don't have that energy, being able to recognize that they go together, and it's okay to eat when you need to. It's okay to not use food in a way to punish yourself as a coping skill, being able to use it as a way to nourish your body and see it as your friend, not your enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
That's
well said.
So many of us end up struggling and not realizing it and just not feeling our best. And when we feel our best, we can do more things that make us feel good. We can live up to that amazing potential that we have. It's so important when to talk about this.
I'm with you.
I remember in high school, like the health class, like physical education, they would do a little bit on nutrition. And it was watching that movie where someone ate McDonald's for 3 meals a day for an entire month. And that was the extent of nutrition. We should have been talking about fueling your body in a way that makes us feel good. We should not have been like, don't eat McDonald's every day, 3 meals a day. No, duh.
Right. Agreed. No, it really is all of this, like all aspects of this conversation, I feel like are completely absent from, I mean, everything kind of mainstream, from medical education. Doctors don't even know a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, let alone the education system. So it's like there's such a need for this because a lot of this conversation, to your point, is just completely absent. And then we grow up, a lot of the time when it comes to either how to feed ourselves and or how to feel our feelings. I work with adults, and adults come to me and are like, it's so embarrassing that I'm 50 years old and I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, how in the world would you know? Whoever taught you? Like, your parents didn't sit you down and have this conversation. They didn't model it for you. You were never taught this in school. Like, at what point do you expect yourself to know any of this? Because it wasn't taught. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, I guess, there is no way that I would know how to do any of this. And it's like, right. So a lot of people, end up kind of catching up, but the main point here is that it's important to have this conversation because all of these things are just kind of missing for a lot of people, just in terms of education and awareness.
It is moving away from that self-blame when we finally have access to that conversation, when we finally are able to make that connection or have that support to make that connection, to begin to make the steps forward for our emotional and mental health. But you don't know what you don't know. And I know that that feels so frustrating because I'm constantly convinced that I should know everything about taking care of myself. And honestly, until someone brings it to my attention and then multiple times, do I finally get it in my head to recognize, hey, this isn't my fault. But now that I know, I can start to make steps forward. And that is amazing. And that is a win within itself.
Absolutely. It comes up very often. I mean, it's part of like my coaching curriculum. That is this idea that it's not your fault. It is your responsibility. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault, especially if anyone listening to this is like struggling with their relationship with food or body image. It's not your fault because something I say all the time when I like to teach it to people is like, you're a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context, surviving on food. So if it feels confusing, stressful, like you're juggling a lot and just trying to figure it out, that makes all the sense in the world. Like there's a lot of reasons for that. That's not your fault. And it is your responsibility. Only you can do the healing work for yourself. Only you can work on your relationship with food. That's not going to happen by itself. And it's also no one else's job or responsibility. So a big theme that often comes up is like, no one's coming to save you. The same way that no one's coming to feed you, no one's coming to feel your feelings for you. Like this is a personal responsibility invitation, but make no mistake, it's not your fault. And that's like a really important, kind of line to walk. That is like, you didn't do this to yourself. You didn't ask for this. You didn't create the society that raised you, that gave you all these ideas that were harmful to begin with. And now that you're waking up to it and you want to do something about it, it's your responsibility to do that.
Absolutely. You've said so many powerful things today. I'm so appreciative of people like you who are creating this conversation, who are offering the support to people, because without it, I know without any of support for myself, I never would have been able to get to a place where I could function and feel good. And for you to be creating that holistic approach and constantly working to help people is absolutely amazing. I'm so appreciative of you. I want to do that a million times. But as we're wrapping up, what's one last thing you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think because this comes up again just really frequently, the value of feeling safe with yourself and feeling safe in your body right now in this moment exactly as it is cannot be emphasized enough. There's a lot of, if you're listening to this, you probably have some interest in personal development and health and things like that. And at the end of the day, what I see over and over again is a lot of people can do all the right things and do all the right practices and modalities and techniques. But if you don't feel safe to be with yourself in your own skin right now in this moment, that's the foundation. That's got to be step one. And so the one thing that I want to offer that I haven't yet said, but that I say all the time in my own work is when you find yourself being uncomfortable or feeling uncomfortable, because of that brain that you have, you will probably start responding to your discomfort as though you're unsafe. So the mantra that I work with people around is I'm uncomfortable, I'm not unsafe. And so when you have really challenging thoughts, when you have really difficult feelings, when you start doing that thing of like, I have to get out of here, I have to get out of here. And that could be because you don't like what you look like, but it could also be because you don't like what you're saying to yourself or because you don't like what you're feeling. You're struggling with the sensations in your body, whatever it is. Again, you just got to know that that's normal. That's just you being a human being. But if it helps, you're uncomfortable. You're not unsafe. Like it is okay for you to be here right now. And I think that's the thing that I just want to really spread and share, and support people with.
You're uncomfortable or not unsafe. For people who are listening who want to connect with you, who want to learn more, how can they do that?
Great. So my website is outofthecave.health. My business is Out of the Cave. You can find me on Instagram, lisa.schlosberg, Schlosberg. And then there's also the Out of the Cave podcast if you want more of this. And you can also just email me through the website, anything like that. I am enrolling for a coaching program. I have a retreat coming up in a few months. So if anyone wants to, work with me directly or learn more about that, go to the website or just feel free to DM me on Instagram. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website, inspiringmygeneration.org, to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.